chapels this past week, that friendship is something we've been talking about. So first I'd like to kind of define what is spiritual friendship. Now at Biola, or maybe at large to the Christian community, I think we've heard the terms like, oh, her and I have a really Christ-centered friendship, or our friendship just bears a lot of fruit, or I don't know, very vague terms. But I don't exactly know what that means. So we're going to dive into what spiritual friendship is. And so there's a man named David Benner. And David Benner, he wrote a book called Sacred Companions. And in that, there's a lot to do with spiritual direction. But part of what he talks about in the first part of this book is spiritual friendship. And so this is the definition that he gives. We'll put it on the screen. It says this. Spiritual friends, they nurture the development of each other's soul. Their love for each other translates into a desire that the other settle for nothing less than becoming all that he or she was intended to be. They offer the gift of themselves and their companionship on the transformational journey of Christian spirituality. While that might be a lot of words, I really love what he has to say in that it's more than just, oh yeah, we're a Christian, check, we can share a Bible verse here and there. But what he says there is the desire to the other settle for nothing less than becoming all that he or she was intended to be. And so I feel like maybe often in Christian community, we kind of overshadow friendship with other things. And I don't mean at Biola, because at Biola you're making a lot of friends, and there's a lot of friendship going on, but maybe it just stays there. And so actually, he goes on to say, in another quote of his, he says this, friendship is one of God's special gifts to humans. Remarkably, friendship is one of the terms God uses to describe the relationship that he desires with us, which is a really still crazy thing for me to fathom, that God desires to be our friend, but that it's a gift. And so in that, just like God's gift to us is friendship, our gift to one another is friendship. And so today we're going to talk about 3 different gifts of friendship. And the 3 are this. The first is hospitality. The second is presence, and the third is dialogue. And again, those sound a bit vague, so let's unpack them. The first one is hospitality. Now, I don't know about you, when I think of hospitality, I think about going over to a friend's house and they bake you cookies and fluff your pillows, and okay, that's actually not for me, but I would imagine that's what a hospitable person would be like. And so we're going to talk about hospitality, and the 3 words of that are stillness, safety, and love. So when we talk about stillness, we're talking about kind of making space for others in our lives, and first cultivating a spirit of quietness within ourselves. So what does that mean? Well, I think first we can look at the character of God, and first in his role in creation, and how he was our host and the most hospitable, and especially in creating the Garden of Eden, that it was an accommodating and an inviting place. And likewise, you can know that God's character is an inviting place of stillness and rest. And so in that, maybe we've never thought about that for our friendships, of how do we create a stillness within ourselves and then a friendship. And so thinking about, I don't know if you guys went to Dr. Malloy's talk in chapel yesterday, but she talked a lot about Sabbathing and the importance of that, and how it sounds like a really grandiose thing, but instead Sabbathing is simply maybe taking an hour a day, maybe just a half hour, of just maybe you should talk about breath prayers, or something that should focus you back on Jesus, or maybe it's taking a Sabbath a week. And so maybe start asking these questions of how can I start cultivating this quietness within myself, to then invite someone into that with you. And so the second thing is safety. So when I think of safety, I think of security. And imagine, maybe you guys have been in these friendships before, but I've had a friendship like this where when I'm talking to them, I don't have to analyze my words or measure the weight of what I'm saying, but instead I can just be. And I think you know that's one of the most refreshing friendships to be in. And imagine being that kind of a safe environment to invite someone into. The last thing is love, and again, that's a really vague term, but I think what I mean here is that's our motivation, because I think we can be motivated by a lot of other things when it comes to friendships, but if our motivation is a genuine love for one another, then I think that's going to make us be a more hospitable and welcoming place in a friendship. Okay, so the second thing we're going to talk about is presence. And so this is a very common word, especially at Biola, like you're in a group of friends and half the people are on their phones, you're like, can you be present with me right now? And it's just like a joke, kind of, but it's like at the same time, if you're talking to someone, they're on your phone, you're like, okay, no, and the 2 words there are then attentiveness and being genuine. And so when I say attentiveness, I don't mean like being attentive, like creepily staring at their eyes. I mean like attentiveness, which don't do that, but attentiveness more so meaning readily that you're letting go of your own interests, your own agenda. Because I think often, even in our best friendships, we can have our own agenda of a rehearsed thing that we're saying, even while they're talking, you're like, okay, no, I'm going to talk about what I ate this morning, and blah, 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 rather than actually listening and being with them. And so the second one there is genuine. And this, again, is a really popular word at Biola, especially being authentic. Like if someone shares something, you're like, oh, thank you so much for being vulnerable, I'm just being genuine. And it's like, what does that even mean? I don't think we have a definition for that. You just say vulnerable and being authentic, and I don't think I understand what that means. So I'd like to give kind of a definition of being genuine is just fully being yourself. And I think maybe some of us haven't felt that way until we were like in elementary school and just like dressed up as a unicorn or something, and like maybe that was me, but I think either way, that wasn't happening. Being just yourself is hard to find in friendships. And I think if you yourself are completely who you are, then it invites others to then be themselves as well. And that's an idea of being present with someone, not thinking about the next step in your friendship or anything else, just being with someone. Okay, the last gift is dialogue. So dialogue sounds like a script to a movie or something. So I'd first like to talk about dialogue. And I think when we think about friendships, it is a lot about talking, giving back, and all that kind of stuff. But I think when I think about dialogue, it's also exploring and getting to know a person and gaining insight about who they are. And so the two words that are not objectifying and respect. So not objectifying is this. I think often we use friendships as a means for something selfish, right? So it's either, oh, they give me status, or they give me affirmation, or they help me with this or that. Rather than saying, would you help me see this person as you do? Would you give me your eyes to see them as you do, as made in your image, and in that, respecting them, respecting who they are. And that way, I think often loving and listening is very synonymous. So we're listening, we're not thinking, again, of our next thing, and more so, we're not trying to think of how to fix them. So even when they're talking or sharing something, you're thinking, ooh, I have the perfect Bible verse to tell you about that. It's not an answer or solution, but it's instead just being with someone, which we've talked a lot at Biola about, but that idea of just being present with someone. Okay, so those are the 3 gifts of friendship. And I think one of the best ways to learn more about spiritual friendship and how this actually looks is to go to the Bible. Now, there are tons of friendships in the Bible. There's famous ones like David and Jonathan or Timothy and Paul. But we're going to land on one. It's in the Old Testament, and it's from the book of Ruth. And Ruth is a great book. It's only 4 chapters, so I encourage you to read it. Or not that 400 books are bad, but I mean, it's a good read. Or you should digest it and really take your time. Either way, it's great. But here's what we're going to talk about. I first want to give some background about the friendship we're going to talk about. It's between Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi. So Naomi, her son died, which is also Ruth's husband. And so they're both in this really grieving moment. And in that moment, this is in chapter 1, early in the chapter, Naomi says to Ruth, thinking of Ruth's messenger, she's like, no, just go back to your own homeland. You don't need to be here, just go back to your own homeland. And Ruth refuses, actually, and she actually says these words that are super powerful. I'm going to screen there. So she says this, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. There's some really intense words to say, especially to a mother-in-law. Like, I don't have one, but I would assume that's intense to say. What's interesting, though, is, okay, so Ruth and Naomi have this beautiful friendship, but it's not out of an obligation, but it's because especially since they're both grieving the loss of a loved one. What's interesting is that this is a huge deal for Ruth to journey with Naomi back to Bethlehem because Ruth is now leaving her Moabite religion and family and everything. She's going with Naomi on this journey. So many of you then know the relationship between Ruth and her future husband Boaz. But the reason that Boaz was even interested in Ruth is because he was inspired by the loyalty, devotion, and deep care that Ruth and Naomi had for one another. And that's something not just as women, but men and women can learn from their friendship. And so we're going to talk about the 3 things that we just talked about, the being present and the dialogue and being hospitable to someone and how we can learn from Ruth and Naomi in that. And so the first thing then is hospitality, right? We learned about being still and creating a safe environment and love. And you see that in Ruth and Naomi. And again, I do encourage you to read it because it's great. It's all throughout the chapter. You can see that it's not out of an obligation or I have to love them. They have a genuine love and loyalty for one another, just something that we can impart into our friendships. The second thing is being present. And very rarely she was present. She literally said, where you go, I will go. Now, translated to Biola, we don't actually say that, like, in Collins, I will be there. Like, you go to Eagles, I will be there. Like, that's terrifying, like, almost like taking or something. So, don't do that. Instead, what I think we can learn from that, though, is I'd like to translate that even to maybe emotionally, where you go, I will go. So you say to your friends, when you fail at exam, I will be there. When your parents are fighting, I will be there. When that relationship ends, I will be there. When finances is hard, I will be there. And I think that's so much deeper and has so much more relevance in our society rather than, a physical location too. You can geographically be with someone, but it's that thought of I'm devoted to you as a person. And that's what I think we can learn from Ruth and Naomi is I will be with you in those grieving and mourning periods of your life. I will be with you in celebration. And that's what I think we can learn from them, is being fully present and attentive to their needs. And lastly, that dialogue. I think what's noted in the 4 chapters of Ruth is the deep respect that they have for one another. And even as Ruth is navigating her relationship with Boaz, she respects so dearly what Naomi says and her advice and her words. And that's something you can learn about in our friendships. And so maybe as we've been talking about these 3 things, maybe one of them in particular has spoken to you and spoken to your heart of, oh wow, I really would like to see that. So maybe it's being hospitable. And for you, maybe that's going to look like cultivating in your own spirit, a spirit of quietness and readiness and stillness. Or being a place of safety so people don't have to analyze their words, they can just be them when they're with you. And knowing, and maybe just checking your motives and thinking today, what are my motivations in this friendship? Is it because I genuinely love this person? Because I'm trying to get something. Or maybe it was the idea of being present, and maybe that's an actual physical thing of I'm not going to put my phone on the table when I'm with someone, I'm going to be fully with someone. Or maybe it's just choosing a time for them and not choosing to watch TV, but instead engaging with them, being present and attentive to who they are. And maybe in the dialogue, it's not just, oh, let's catch up in each other's lives, which is good and it has its place, but I think it's also exploring and getting insight about who this person is, who is made in the image of God and who they are. And so in that, I challenge you to think about even just one way today that you can impart one of these things into your friendship, how you can be a friend that genuinely loves and listens.
Okay, so as I was introduced about myself, I am transferred, and so with that as transferring, you kind of have your own expectations that come up. And so coming to Biola, I definitely had my expectations. A lot of people transferring with me would say they transferred to Biola because of the community at Biola. And maybe that connects with a lot of you, is that you saw this community at Biola and you wanted to be a part of it. And so we all come to Biola with our own expectations. But expectations don't always match with our reality. I don't know if you guys have seen 500 Days of Summer, great movie, but you can watch this clip. Alright, so basically what's happening here, because you can really hear it, but basically with this short video clip, what I'm trying to explain here is that we all have our expectations versus reality. In this video, they kind of show, okay, you have the split screen of expectations on one side and reality on the other. And so we see in the movie basically what's happening is the actor, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, super attractive, and the girl, Zoe Deschanel, which you guys know from that TV show, Can't Think of. In the movie, they're dating, and then they break up, and now time has passed, and they run into each other, and she invites him over. And so he's thinking in his head, awesome, this is great, I'm going to be able to get a chance to kind of rekindle this and maybe get back together. And so you see this where that split screen comes in. We have this expectations on one side and the reality on the other. And everything's different from what he imagined. The gift of he brings in the beginning is simply just a nice gesture. It's not something that really shows his continual interest with her. And while you see at this party, he's expecting this small, intimate party, but in fact actually turns out to be this big group of strangers where they just have small talk and he tells dumb jokes. Kind of like myself right now. But I think this last frame shows it perfectly. You see on the one side the expectations of them two interacting. It's just them having a good conversation. And then the reality is really, he's at this big party with a bunch of people hanging out with not just her. Now, this is not the part where I go and talk about whether girls and guys can be friends. Not doing that here, I'm not going to be a Jonathan Fincher. But what I'm talking about more is this idea of expectations versus reality, especially within your friendships. And so I said, like being transferred, I had many expectations of coming to Biola and what this community was going to be about. If you were to look at a video of my reality versus expectations in my life at Biola, you could see me in my expectations side, walking from class to class, knowing every single person I passed, waving at everyone as they say hi to me, and I know everyone's name, it's great. But what reality would cause us to bring is really more me walking through school, waving at someone I thought I knew, them kind of looking at me weird, like, do I know you? And then me confidently pretending I was talking to the person behind them and walking past really quickly with my head down. And that's a little bit of our senior year, is what has brought me to now. And so super senior year, things have settled down, and my expectations of Biola community and friendships have naturally leveled out. I realize I can't be close friends with everyone. But then, you have your real core girls, your type friends, the ones that you Instagram about, the ones that you say how thankful you are for doing life together with them, and how blessed you are to have them in your life. Just that, and if you're super Christian and you say oh, sister in Christ, just like Cassie was saying, just really brings God's life to me, and my heart is so full. Which I'm not hating because I can't, because I've totally done that before. But here I am about to leave Biola, and there's definitely this bit of fear of what lies ahead. I'm starting to ask myself, can I find friends like this in the real world? What happens to these friendships when we're no longer right next to each other? Can I not walk over to their dorm or their apartment? What happens when we're spread across the state or even across the country? But then there's also the sweetness of looking back. Thankful for these Biola moments, these times of hanging out in the library really late and taking group pictures in the library during finals, or kidnapping one another for birthdays. Those times are sweet, and I'll remember them well. And there's this uniqueness of this Biola community that we have that we really do got to take advantage of. This hyperactive community where you're with someone all the time, whether you like it or not. This community somehow has turned all of us INFJs into ENFJs. Or if you don't speak Myers-Briggs, basically all these introverts now into extroverts. Or at least a little bit more extrovert than you were before. And so looking back, being thankful, I can look forward, not with fear, but seeking what did Christ have for me? What has God taught me in these friendships at Biola that I can use now as I go forward in life? Or where can God continue to correct my expectations versus reality in my heart and my relationships with friends? Or if you're just starting this Biola journey, maybe the question for you is, what is fair to expect in these relationships that you make at Biola? Cassie gave us an awesome description of what these things called spiritual friendships are, and what we do as well as what they do, as well as what the ideals are within them. And so you may be thinking, what do I need to actually achieve this? I feel like when we get this list of things of what we could do and what we could be doing better, we start to go into this fix-it mode of okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. Much like New Year's resolutions and all these things, they kind of fall apart after a little while. And so I think the mistake here is we think what enables us to hold these relationships together and to keep them last and enables us to do these things is because of our commitment to them. We do this with marriage, jobs, so many different things where we think that, if we just commit to it, it will last. But this isn't the case. Otherwise, our jobs would last forever and marriages would never end and there wouldn't be heartbreak. But it's simply not true. This is where the myths of Christianity come in as well. We say, if you don't like someone, act like you do, and the feelings will follow. Or, choose to love this person, and you will. But if you try this, you know it's not easy. We rather agree with Paul more easily when he says in Romans 7:19, "For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing." While choice and commitment are good elements of friendship, it's simply not enough. What enables the longevity and the vitality of our friendship is our attachments. Our commitment and choices come out of attachment of loving relationships, not the reverse. It's this natural response that we get when we experience this love and attachment that enables us to have commitment. It's much the same we see in how we receive grace and how we receive God's gracious gifts to us. We don't respond because we're told to or because we choose to commit, but rather it's this attachment that comes from a love deeply ingrained in Christ. And it makes sense. To our created beings, we're made in God's image, made relational beings. As it says in Genesis 1:26, so God created man in his own image. Let us make man in our our image, after our likeness. And so we see these things of God in his Trinitarian relationship, bringing us this desire for relationship. And so it's this friendship love that really establishes our commitments and makes our connections. But then the question comes, okay, how do we foster this attachment? How do we instill this love for others in our lives? Friendships are this weird, but also beautifully unique thing that we just decide, hey, I'm going to start hanging out with that person. Maybe it was a class that you had with them, or they were your roommate, or you ran into them at an all hall or something like that. This interaction happens and friendships start to begin. There's that great C.S. Lewis quote that says, in friendship, we think we have chosen our peers. In reality, a few years difference in the dates of our births, a few more miles between certain houses, the choice of one university instead of another, the accident of a topic being raised or not raised at the first meeting, any of these chances might have kept us apart. But for a Christian, there is strictly speaking no chances. A secret master of ceremonies has been at work. Christ, who said to his disciples, "You have not chosen me, but I have chosen you," can truly say to every group of Christian friends, "Ye have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another." The friendship is not a reward of our discriminating good taste in finding one another out. It is an instrument by which God reveals to each of us the beauty of others. And so often as it is, God's behind the scenes in it all. But I also believe that this is the same God that is empowering us to do so. That he's not just creating these friendships to happen and then he steps off, but that he enables us to be these things that Cassie spoke about. Because if we're seeking to give this love out of our own selves, we're simply not going to have enough. So it comes out that we need some kind of external source of love, which comes from Christ. And so we see here, as God commands us, he also empowers us. It says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Beloved, if God has so loved us, we also ought to love one another." We love because he first loved us. And so we only go to God, who's the only person who constantly can fill us. Living in relationship with Christ, in Christ, we are constantly given the grace to pour out to others. Without this, we'll rather just seek to live on our own willpower, to seek these characteristics of friendships on our own skill or commitment or merit. But it's simply not possible. Rather, we're asked to come alongside of Christ and bring our friends along with us. In that time, we can then be physically present to that person, compassionate, grace-giving, being like Christ, but not being Christ for the other, carrying burdens, feeling their pains, defending them in injustice, and weeping with them. So really listen to that person without judgment or feeling of judgment. So in the times when our emotions are coming up and we want to just throw a Bible verse at them or slap them across the face because they're making poor choices, but rather to contain the sake of our emotions for the sake of being with them. And so we don't seek to be Christ or be a savior to another person or try to take the place of Christ, for this is what burned us out. And this is, I think, the mistake we make when it comes to expectation in our friendships. We go to others, or we expect ourselves to be Christ for one another. And so we're left feeling disappointed and let down. We have this expectation of what our community will be like, that this certain friendship will be like blank. And so we go to them to fulfill our needs, to be perfect, always available, and totally unflawed. And while I believe our friendship can be a taste of this, that our friendships can really point us to Christ and show us his love, until the kingdom comes, we won't perfectly know what it really is to be a true friend to one another. And so what do? We give one another grace. I believe if we lived with these less expectations, if we opened our hands to God and what he would have for us in the friendships that we're currently in, I believe we'd be a lot more satisfied in what we have. We would be humbled and better recognize the gracious gift of friends that we have. not coveting the friend that we see on Instagram who seems a lot cooler than our friends, or not coveting this cool experience that this person had and being upset about it. And so, in my little last piece to you guys, I just urge us to be more merciful, forgiving one another of our failures, being gracious, continuing to give and outpour even when it doesn't seem like it's going to be returned, and to be thankful for the friendships that God has placed in your lives right now, and just to recognize the great gift that they really are. But that we would do this all from a life in Christ. That would then outpour us into being able to do these well and not in our own power.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.